Hey folks, this is Kelani. If you haven't been all too interested in Mythic Plus so far because the vast majority of Battle for Azeroth dungeons have quite a lot going on, especially when it comes to trash, and it's been more of a headache for you rather than a fun experience when you try to get a key or two done, this might be a great time to give Mythic Plus another shot. A whole round of nerfs were slapped onto the dungeons very recently, mainly focused on reining in the potential power of trash mobs, with more to come, potentially, from what I understand. I want to have a look through those because quite a few dungeons that were being actively avoided due to their ridiculous trash packs, or just outright overpowered mechanics, seem to have been knocked down quite a significant notch. King's Rest might actually be worth running on fortified weeks. Hooray! There's also a little bit of information about how the Heart of Azeroth will work going forward, and it sounds like things are going to change quite drastically. So I want to touch on that, and then there's a very curious potion which made its way into the underbelly of Dalaran. We'll talk about that one last. For now, let's have a look at just how badly some of these dungeons have been nerfed. I'll try lay this out as neatly as possible because there are a lot of changes here. The best way I can think of is just to separate this by dungeon and then work our way through each. So let's start with the dreaded King's Rest. This dungeon has been one to avoid on fortified weeks especially, and for good reason. That special gauntlet trash pack is pretty lethal on fortified, and most of the trash in King's Rest is actually pretty strong when compared to some other dungeons. There's a reason why people have been ignoring it, and it's mainly because everything is overtuned. The first trash mob being brought back into line is the animated Guardian. When they use release inhibitors, that haste bonus only increases melee haste now instead of allowing them to almost instant cast their slams. That should save a few folks from getting stunned or one-shot. In the next room, the Shadowborn Warrior's gust slash damage has been reduced by about 37%, and then the animated gold ads on the first boss have had their health reduced by about 75%. That's pretty crazy. You shouldn't ever have any issues killing them going forward. The gauntlet after the first boss has been touched on as well. Various debuffs here had their duration reduced. Hidden Blade was dropped to 4 seconds from 8, Axe Barrage was dropped from 6 seconds to 10, that was a really nasty one. Dark Shot now takes 1.5 seconds to land instead of instantly appearing, and its slow was reduced from 11% to 20%. Senshal Mabara can now be crowd controlled once again. Hopefully that takes a few pain points out of this area, but I feel like the damage is still probably going to be pretty high, but I guess it is meant to be a set of special mobs. Working your way through the dungeon, you would come across the Purification Constructs next. Both Purification Beam and Purification Strike have had their damage reduced, Beam by 45% and Strike by 42%, so some pretty hefty nerfs for that chap. In the next room, the Embalming Fluid Poison debuff, that's the one that slows you, has had its duration reduced to 6 seconds from 10, which probably won't make a difference if you keep getting hit by the pools anyway. After the second boss, we come to some of the most frustrating trash in the game, including our good friend the Berserker. These chaps were made CC immune recently. Bit of an odd choice, but you'd be glad to know that that change has been reverted, so you should be able to shackle and control them to your heart's content. Their Severing Blade damage was also reduced by 25%, which has been a long time coming. And then the only other changes for King's Rest are two bosses. The Explosive Totem's Explode now deals 44% less damage, so not quite a one-shot if you don't manage to kill it in time, and Whirling Axes from the Axe boss will deal 45% less damage. That's pretty hefty considering those two abilities are more or less the only two things which can actually hurt you for both of those bosses when they're up. Then we move on over to Dazar. Impaling Spear has been reduced by 45%, the damage of it at least, so quite a few changes, but more importantly some pretty large nerfs for a lot of the frustrating areas of the dungeon. Let's move on to the Motherlode, where we have less changes overall. The first mobs you'll come across that have been nerfed are the Earth Shapers. Their Rock Lance damage has been reduced by 25%, and they won't cast Earth Shield quite as often. The Wanton Sappers around here will also cast Final Blast at 10% health instead of 20%, and then over on the other side of the minecart, the Mastermind's Leech Globule healing has been reduced by 50%, so you should be able to kill them quite a bit faster. Feckless Assistant won't cast Transfiguration Serum quite as often, and the Weapon Tester's Echo Blade damage has been reduced by 50%, which should make quite a few of these packs a little bit easier to deal with. That's actually it for Motherlode, so let's move on to the Temple of Sethralis. This starts out with a bit of a buff, actually. Adaris' Cyclone Strike can now hit multiple times per tornado, which means if you get hit, there's actually a pretty high chance you'll die. If you try to run with the tornado for whatever reason, you're guaranteed to die. I definitely don't recommend tanking those tornadoes at all. The charged Dust Devil Trash Mob won't try to cast their Healing Surge quite as often, and the Neurotoxin debuff from Marksman will only last 4 seconds instead of 8. Thank Thrall, that's probably my favourite change from this entire list. I hate that debuff with a passion. The Electrified Scales cast from various mobs is now kickable, and the same goes for Snake Charm from Plague Doctors at the end of the instance, so you can actually prevent those abilities from going off now, which is a lovely change. The Faithless Tender's Greater Healing Potion will only affect one ally now instead of being AoE, so pulling more tenders is likely going to be a thing in the future, and then the conscripts near the end of the dungeon will all deal 70% less damage and respawn just a little bit faster. With the changes to the lightning traps to make them a lot slower, and the changes to the last boss which make that fight quite a bit faster, Temple is looking to be a little more interesting, I would say. Onwards and upwards, next we have the Shrine of the Storm. Some of these changes are huge, like the Shrine Templar's silly little protection aura. Now that has to be cast by the Templar, it's not just a passive effect, and is interruptible, so you can prevent it from ever happening. And even if the cast does complete, you can now purge the buff. That change is huge for the first section of Shrine. The Temple Attendant's Wash Away cast has also had its damage reduced by 25%, and it no longer hits pets or guardians, so they can't get thrown into extra trash mobs. That first little section there with these mobs is going to be so much easier and so much cleaner overall. A little further into the dungeon you'll come across Runecarver Sorn. His Carved Flesh cast now does 75% less initial damage, but increases as he channels on a player. You'll still need to get into the rune, but now you have a little grace period where he won't one-shot you. If you decide to stand out of the rune, you're still gonna die. On the bridge crossing over, the Deathbringer's Rip Mind won't be cast quite as often, and Lord Stormsong's Mindrend will now cast on a random target instead of the closest, so healers need to watch out for that one. Speaking of healers, only healing specs will be targeted by Whispers of Power on the last boss, so if you are having a healer hold it for the entire duration and letting a DPS get the second Whispers, I'm afraid you're going to have to rethink your strategy. Over in Siege of Bareilles, there's a handful of changes which could help things move along a little smoother. The Black Tar Bomber's Burning Tar initial damage was reduced by 50%, and Firebomb's damage was reduced by 25%, so some AoE damage nerfs there. Ashvane Commander's Bolstering Shout, that's the one which provides everyone around it with a damage reduction, is now a 5-second cast time, giving you plenty of time to interrupt it. But perhaps the most impactful changes are to the trash just after the second boss. The Demolisher's Terrifying Roar now has a 10-yard range down from 30, so you should be able to stand pretty close without ever having to worry about getting feared, unless you're a melee. The bananas that get thrown out during the monkey's little rampage also take way longer to actually land, so you have plenty of time to move out of the way, and it seems like the visual is definitely better on that one. And then they also fixed the last boss tentacles not aggroing properly, so you can't ignore the tentacle on the last platform anymore. Sorry. Toldagor is more of a mixed bag right now. The buzzing drone adds on the first boss won't melee at all, which should make the tanks very happy during necrotic weeks, but they'll cast their itchy bite more frequently. The second boss has been changed quite a bit as well. He'll smoke bomb and transition at 70% now instead of 50%, and when he starts channeling Motivating Cry, he'll take 90% less damage. So you actually have to interrupt it now, but that has a few knock-on effects. Because he has so much more health going into that phase, you're going to have to actually deal with his mechanics in phase 2, instead of just letting him channel while you pound him to the ground, which includes his brother, who stuns one of your group members and you have to DPS him down. So that fight actually became a lot harder. The amount of damage that cannons deal on the top floors will now scale better with Keystone level, making dealing with the trash up there a lot faster if you're really good in the cannons, and making it a whole lot easier to kill your party members if you're not such a great shot. I mean, I'm not saying I kill them on purpose, but they need to get out of the way, you know what I mean? And then the final change is for the last boss. His incendiary rounds can no longer stack, which should reduce the amount of damage everyone takes from that fight by quite a lot, so the healers should definitely be happy with that one. And finally we have the Underrot. We all know that the matrons in the first section were given true sight, so we can't skip this trash anymore, but now they've actually done something about the rest of the trash, so we might not have to skip it. All of the Blood Priest abilities will be cast less often, the Headhunter's Barbed Spear duration was reduced to 4 seconds from 8, and the duration of Warcry from the matrons was knocked all the way down to 8 seconds from 30. To be fair though, 30 seconds was a bit daft for something which buffed their damage so significantly. That's the only trash changes though, but honestly that's probably the only trash in Underrot that really needed some attention. As a nice little bonus, the first boss will now only ever spawn one Blood Mirror clone when she casts it, so if you get to the point where she casts it again, you won't have to worry about 3 bosses firing blood bolts into your tank's rear end. Those are the most noteworthy dungeon changes that we didn't already cover last week, and there's some pretty huge nerfs in there. I don't think anything really surprises me though. If anything, I would have expected these nerfs to come in quite a bit earlier. Several dungeons have been on players' no-no lists for quite a while now, and the major problem of making changes this late is that it's going to be hard to change people's opinions if they already think King's Rest or Shrine of the Storm aren't worth running. If you don't want to run that dungeon because you've only had bad experiences with it, chances are you're not going to want to pick it up again unless you're trying to push for the higher keys. I guess only time will tell though. That's it for the dungeon so far, but Ian did mention in the last Q&A to expect some more changes early this week. We're already halfway through the week, so that deadline has kind of been missed, I think, which could mean one of two things. These changes are the changes he was talking about, which seems a bit weird because they happened about the same time as the Q&A, wasn't early this week, or more changes are in fact on their way. I can think of a few other areas which pose a bit of a problem in these dungeons, so maybe they're not done tweaking just yet. One other thing that was brought up in the Q&A last week is the Heart of Azeroth, and how it's going to stay relevant and interesting in the future. Ian gave us a pretty interesting answer. He said that the Heart of Azeroth hasn't really been a major plot point so far, but it will move into the spotlight during Rise of Azshara. If you haven't been keeping up with patches, Rise of Azshara is patch 8.2, so we might have to wait quite a bit longer before we see anything super exciting happen to the Heart of Azeroth, but apparently the Battle of Desert Allure will be the last raid tier where we'll have to level up our amulet to unlock Azerite traits. I guess that means that after this new item level bump, we won't have to re-earn our traits ever again. Everything will just be unlocked for us. I guess assuming if we have the max level of our heart at any rate, they might cap it out at artifact level 50 and have future gear require that. Something along those lines. Either way, it looks like the current iteration of Azerite armor and how we interact with our artifact isn't going to be the norm when patch 8.2 hits. It sounds like they don't have their new concept fully fleshed out, but the little piece of info we did get suggests they might be looking at a new talent tree, very similar to the artifact trees in Legion, which is directly related to the heart itself. We'll be spending artifact power to unlock powers and traits and talents in the heart itself, instead of Azerite armor. If this works out, patch 8.2 could really turn Battle for Azeroth on its head. Azerite armor has been an issue of contention since early beta, and if they're really going down the path of pushing it off to the side and severing its ties to artifact power, this could get really interesting. I'm a little sad that we'll have to wait until patch 8.15 is done and dusted and on live servers before we'll see 8.2 hit the public test rounds, but I'm really excited to see how they go about this. I hope they do something that closely resembles our Legion artifacts, but maybe with a few more choices to make, maybe different forks or pathways which empower different abilities or provide unique active spells. Part of the problem with the Heart of Azeroth is that we don't interact with it at all, but if we had an ability which drew on the Heart's power directly, either to empower our spells or just fire off a huge Azerite laser, that could be really cool. I do think they'll probably keep things more general rather than spec specific though, seeing as everyone has the same artifact. We all have the Heart of Azeroth. I imagine we might see 3 different talent trees, one for tanks, one for healers, and one for DPS, instead of the wide variety we had during Legion. I would love to see more spec or class orientated effects, but I don't really think Blizzard will take on that amount of work, especially when they're having to remake a system which hasn't turned out so well in the first place. I'm still really excited to see what this new Heart of Azeroth progression is going to look like though. And then I promised you we would talk about a curious potion in Dalaran. If you pop down into the sewers and head on over to our favourite little potion maker, Fizzy Liver Zapper, you can find a new potion called the Elixir of Tongues. Now this isn't actually a new potion. Apparently it's been in the game file since the Burning Crusade, and it's only just now been properly implemented. If that doesn't make you raise an eyebrow, maybe this next part will. This potion allows you to comprehend the opposite faction's common language. So that's Common for the Alliance and Orcish for the Horde. This means you can freely communicate with anyone in game no matter what race they are or which faction they're tied to. That's pretty huge and could be an interesting first step towards breaking down those faction barriers that we've been stuck with for so long now. Maybe Warcraft will end up with just the one faction, us versus the bad guys. Maybe someday, but for now we can all have a nice little chinwag in Dalaran or whatever other sanctuaries we end up sharing in the future, Horde or Alliance. But that's it for this little update and this video. What do you think of all these dungeon nerfs? Have you been avoiding Mythic Plus due to the dungeons being a little bit more involved than what we were used to in Legion? How about the prospect of an entirely new form of progression with the Heart of Azeroth? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.